Good evening. We'll call this order, or this Lewis and Clark County and City of Helena Planning Board meeting to order. It's a little bit after 6 o'clock. Tonight, we'll be providing comments on the Barbara Krause Living Trust conservation easements. The first thing we have on our agenda, I do not believe we have a quorum. Is that true? Okay, we do not have a quorum at this point. We have 4 members and need 5 members for a quorum. However, we will not be taking a vote tonight. We are only going to be providing comments so we can commence our business without a quorum. And now we'll proceed to introductions. We'll start with introductions in the room first. I'm Lois Steinbeck. I'm the vice chair. I'm an appointee from the county.
Gene Walborn, I'm a city appointee.
Adrian, how about you?
Good evening, Adrian Cotton, county appointee.
Okay, and James?
Yes, hi, James Sontag here, county appointee.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll proceed to hear a summary of the Krause Ranch Conservation Easement. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, Planning Board members. Angie Hubbard, Lewis and Clark County Community Development and Planning. Tonight, you're gathered for this public meeting to provide comments on 2 conservation easements proposed from the Krause Living Trust Family Ranch to be donated to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The properties are located generally southwest of Augusta. This vicinity map shows the location of the 2 conservation easements. The larger of the 2 is known as the main conservation easement, totaling 3,060 acres in size. The second parcel is referred to as the Crone Lake parcel, totaling 625 acres in size. Under the MCA 766206, all conservation easements are subject to review prior to recording by the appropriate local planning authority for the county, which in this case is this board. This board may review and comment on the proposed conveyance as it relates to the comprehensive planning for the area. These comments are advisory in nature, and the conservation easements can be recorded after the comments from the board are received. This area is part of the Augusta planning area for the Lewis and Clark County growth policy, and the proposal is consistent with the growth policy. And I'm not sure if Gary Sullivan from Montana State Director of Conservation Fund is here. Is he? But I'm willing to answer any questions that I may be able to.
So that concludes your formal presentation?
Ms.
Okay.
Chair, yes, that does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from board members?
Madam Chair, I do have a couple.
Okay.
So Angie, these are more curiosity than anything. So if you can't answer them, it's no big deal.
Okay.
And we don't even need to follow up. But I was just kind of curious on, if you look at the header of this, it's in red and it says Barbara Krause Living Trust. I'm looking at easement, or on page 4 of 20.
Okay.
And it's down towards the bottom of the page where it says, no rights herein are granted to the general public for access or to or entry upon the land subject to this grant of easement for any purpose. Then later on in the document, it talks about hunting and fishing and all of that. So I'm just, if you know, why does it say that? But later on in the document, it talks about hunting and fishing on the property. I guess it doesn't grant a right, so the public can still access it, or?
Ms. Chair, Planning Board members, unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that question.
My guess is it, Madam Chair, it just doesn't, in the sense of official contract, essentially doesn't provide a contractual right, but the grant fee the grantor, grantee can still allow hunting and fishing is, I guess, but I was just kind of curious.
I had the same question, Jean. I thought it was conflicting that there would be hunting and timber harvest and fishing, and yet I read that very same language you did. Do other planning board, any other questions, Jean?
I have just one quick
Okay.
question, another one, and this one is on 11 of 20. And it's the same for both easements, since they're the same. Do you know why there's a restriction on commercial energy development on these properties? Is that a Forest Service deal or?
Ms. Chair, Planning Board members, I am so sorry, but
that's-
unfortunately, I
that's
don't
fine.
know the answer.
That's fine. Again, it's more curiosity. I wasn't sure if that's a conservation easement provision in the statute or if it's the Forest Service or the landowner, whoever. But thank you.
Board members, just for your information, Mr. Sullivan is attempting to get on. He's having trouble connecting to Zoom. I've resent him an invitation, so hopefully he will be joining us soon.
Okay. We may revisit these questions if he can. Do other board members have questions that are online?
None here, but thank you.
None here as well.
Okay, well, I had kind of a question as well, and it had to do with a later subdivision of the property that's mentioned, where another, it sounded like a ranching operation could be added, where as long as the lot size was 160 acres. And I was just interested in knowing more about that, as well as the public access provisions that Jean talked about. I could find that for you. I had it highlighted in my copy here.
Thank you.
It would be point 11 on page 7.
Here we go. Mr. Sullivan has just joined the meeting.
Oh, welcome, Mr. Sullivan. Perhaps, Mr. Sullivan, would you be willing to take some questions from the planning board? We don't have concerns, but we do have questions just about some of the terms of the easement.
Absolutely. And my apologies. I think the problem with getting connected was the hyperlink that was in Phil's email got caught up in my IT security. So my apologies to the planning board, and I appreciate the opportunity to present the conservation funds proposal for working with the Krause family. So absolutely willing to take any questions that the planning board.
Jean, do you want to add with yours?
Sure. I just had a couple questions, and hopefully you have the document in with you, but it's on page 4 of 20, and it's the first page of the easement document. But towards the end of the first page, it talks about no rights herein are granted to the general public for access to or entry upon the land subject to this grant of easement for any purpose. So I was just curious as to what that really means, because later on in the document it talks about, or the contract, it talks about hunting and fishing access, essentially. So I was wondering if those two conflicted, or if you can help walk us through those. two provisions?
Sure. Great question. And again, my apologies for keeping you all waiting. I might just really quickly just give a quick intro. So I'm the state director for the Conservation Fund. Some of you may recognize my name. In a previous life, I ran the real estate program for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the last 22 years of my career. Was based out of Great Falls, and thought I was going to retire in 2018 and just hunt and fish the rest of my life. And the Conservation Fund made me an offer to come back and essentially do the same things. I've been working with ranch families for about the last 35 years in Montana on conservation easements. This particular easement is one I might mention really very quickly. The Conservation Fund's been around since 1985, so we're a 501c3 that's an accredited land trust. We work in all 50 states. We really might think of us as a kind of a conservation broker. We essentially assist federal, state, and local nonprofits with purchasing land in both fee title and easements for projects where agencies simply either don't have the resources, don't have the time, don't have the staff capacity, or don't have all three. So the Conservation Fund, I actually started working with the organization in 2005 when we had the first designation of an area for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service called the Rocky Mountain Front Conservation Area. It was a project that basically it's conservation easements only. The funding for the program comes from the Land and Water Conservation Fund and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And frankly, in my previous capacity, we currently hold, I say we, it's hard after 35 years of not saying we. I don't work for the agency anymore, but I work closely with them. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service holds about 110,000 acres of easements along the front. Obviously not all of those in Lewis and Clark County, but many in Lewis and Clark, Teton, Pend Oreille, and even some in Glacier County, working with the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. So the bottom line is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services easement program, which again, we are essentially brokering or helping assist with that program. The Conservation Fund actually bridge finances, and essentially we use our capital to purchase the easement, we hold it, and then convey the easement to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service once they've gotten through all of their internal process, and more importantly, get funding from Congress. Some of you may remember the name Conservation Fund because I believe we were the first open space grantee for the Lewis and Clark open space bond program on the McDonough Ranch. Some of you might be familiar with that. It's a 7,000 acre property in the north end of Lewis and Clark County. At the time I was running the program, the McDonough family wanted to do an easement. We didn't have the funding. And so my predecessor, Gates Watson, worked to secure the funding, part of which was provided by the Lewis and Clark County Open Space program. And I believe that would have been probably in somewhere around 2009, 2010. Now I'll get to your question. Units or conservation easements that are become part of the Rocky Mountain Front Conservation Area, the landowner retains the right to control all public access. It's strictly a habitat program. So when it refers to on the very first portion of that page 4, essentially there are no public access or hunting or other access privileges provided by the easement. The landowner does, however, retain further in the document, the landowner retains the right to do whatever they want. They can allow for block management. They can even enter into an agreement with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and sell a second easement that allows access. It's just the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services program solely focuses on habitat conservation and also maintaining, viable working ranches along the front, which we feel very strongly that the reason the front is blessed with so many, healthy fish and wildlife populations is because of the long-term stewardship of those multi-generational ranches. And again, apologize for the long answer, but I wanted to give a little background and context, and because I was late, I didn't have a chance to do that. So,
This is Lois Steinbeck. And Mr. Sullivan, thank you very much. That helped me a great deal to understand the nature of the conservation easement here. I guess I have one kind of follow-up question. So then could the owner of the land have commercial hunting operations on their land?
They can, and basically the easement allows for the landowner if they want to charge a trespass fee, if they want to lease a property. I guess, you know, early on, and I know this background because I was involved in developing the program, we really wanted to leave landowners with other viable options other than traditional revenue from a cow-calf operation, whether that be in-home businesses on doing things from the internet. So the way the easement reads is basically any in-home business that they can do without physically altering the land, constructing additional residences. So if someone wanted to establish a bed and breakfast or build a bunch of, you know, recreational cabins that they're going to lease out for, you know, fee hunting, they would not be able to do that. But if it's a typical Montana, you know, ag operation where they want to charge a trespass fee to allow people to hunt on a day use basis, or if they want to lease the property out to an outfitter, they can legally do that under the easement. It's considered an in-home business. We had lots and lots of debates internally about whether that was a good thing or a bad thing from a natural resource standpoint. I guess we, you know, when I say we, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service landed on the sort of side of leaving those decisions about that don't really have an effect on the habitat, leaving that up to the individual landowner to make those decisions as to whether or not they did want to do it. Just on the flip side, landowners can enroll their entire easement encumbered property into Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks' block management program. They can generate revenue that way, or they can do just simple, like many ranchers along the front, allow hunting on a free basis with written permission. It's really fairly open-ended on that in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Are there other questions?
I have one more question, but I think I know the answer after that. The great explanation you had. Now that I understand the conservation easement much better. So on page 11 of 20, it says that basically commercial energy facilities are prohibited. So I think I know the answer, but I thought I'd ask the question anyway. So why is that, I guess?
That's a great question. I guess it's trying to balance that, you know, the commercial aspect. And again, Canada, we were talking about wind generation, wind farms there, just the potential impact, not only the roading, you know, the actual construction of roads, the concrete pads, the impact that developing a commercial wind field is fairly significant when it comes to grassland birds. That was just a position we took, I guess, trying to determine, and obviously that's a green energy source. We did not want to, you can see that it under, you know, permitted uses that we don't preclude someone for doing on ranch, you know, generating, whether it be solar, wind, or whatever, to run their operation. But the large commercial wind fields, we just felt that was a type of surface use that caused enough fragmentation impact to the habitat was a type of commercial use that was not compatible with the terms of the easement program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
You
Matt.
bet.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Either Adrian or James, do you have any questions for Mr. Sullivan?
No, Mr. Sullivan, but thank you. That was very helpful.
Glad to do it. Thank you.
I had one question regarding page 16 of 20. It's saying that constructing, maintaining, and repairing or replacing one additional family residence within the easement lands. Is that typical? Is that something that is, is that something that's normally typical in these easements? Or is that something that you can
It is, it's very typical on large. So Fish and Wildlife Service, obviously you can't get all the policy guidance and management associated with the terms of an easement program. So they do have a corresponding administration and management handbook that goes for all their easements. And as a general rule, any properties that are larger than 640 acres, if the landowner wants to retain an additional single family residence, that's permitted. Of course, that does potentially have an impact on appraised value. So it has to be agreed to upfront before all these easements have to go through a very rigid, what's called yellow book or federal appraisal process, because ultimately federal funds are going to be used. The conservation fund, obviously we're using what we call our revolving land account. We're using private funding to actually consummate the easement with the landowner. But again, we're only in the chain of title. Typically it's about a year, because that's generally how long it takes U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get funding out of Congress. This particular year, it may be longer. We may be holding the Krause easement for a while if with the pending budget discussions and shutdown in Washington, D.C. But most of the easements on larger ranch tracts, we want to encourage landowners to think about these, obviously being perpetual easement documents, think about long-term residence needs. And again, it's not that most of them are looking to subdivide something off or retain a building site. We're asking them to think about, what if your kids want to come back to the ranch? If the ranch was traditionally supporting one family, what if another one wants to come back and, help mom and dad with the ranch and needs a place to live? What about thinking about 20, 30, 50 years from now? You have major health issues and you need to have a hired man. So we actually encourage, and these are all willing seller transactions and all voluntary program. Most of the time, ranchers reach out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, express an interest, and then they will steer them towards me, particularly if there's a time crunch. In the case of the Krause family, they just have an opportunity to purchase a property that they've been leasing for a while that's important to their hay base, and there was no way that they could wait long enough to get through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services process, which is normally about 2 years to get through the appraisal process and then get congressional funding. So again, long answer to your short question. Most of our easements that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service do have a reserve building site. Most pragmatic ranchers want that building site close to utilities, close to the county road for snow removal. Typically, they're in the same building envelope where other residences are. And if they're located that way as such, there's very little impact on the appraised value of the conservation easement, because obviously having several residents co-located together, it's not like they're going to be able to utilize their one ag split and split that property off and sell it to a non-family related or a non-ranch related entity.
Okay, thank you. And is that considered on the easement still, or is there just kind of a chunk of land that is
No,
under
it is still part of the easement. So I know some nonprofits do actually carve out a building envelope where it is not considered part of the easement. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service encumbers all the acres and then allows for those uses even on those easement encumbered parcels or descriptions. So it is a permitted use, but the underlying, the rest of the terms of the easement apply to that same ranch center or that same building envelope.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
This is Lois, and I kind of have a follow-up question. You may have answered it, but I would like to ask it specifically. And it's item number 11 that talks about, let's see, that's on page 7, that talks about selling, exchanging, devising, or gifting lands into no more than 2 168-acre parcels. Or they can be no smaller than 160-acre parcels. Does that mean this easement could have multiple owners then?
No. So what that provision really states is that the Krause family is retaining the right for what we call an agricultural split. And based on Fish and Wildlife Services policy, an ag split is considered any parcel to be of 160 acres or larger. So what they basically could do on this roughly 4,000 acre easement, they could sell 2,000 acres to a neighbor. That the easement obviously runs with the land. It's a perpetual deed restriction. The neighbor, if they bought 2,000 acres, would essentially be bound by the same terms and agreements of the easement. They could, if they wanted to, sell 160 acres to a neighbor, or some other variation. It just has to be 160 acres or greater. They can't go out and cleave off 5 acres and sell 5 acres to someone for a residential lot. Obviously, what's also sort of controlling that is where they have the reserved house site. So bottom line is, we don't want to have an all or nothing kind of scenario where all of a sudden the family has some financial need, and there are some easements that allow the property to never be divided. And so again, we were looking for some middle ground in terms of trying to give landowners some flexibility if they did have a need to sell a piece of the property. Again, primarily it would be for agricultural use. That's what the easement would continue to dictate. They wouldn't have to sell the entire ranch. They could sell a smaller portion down to a 160, but they could sell half of it. They could sell 3/4 of it. The key is they only get one split on the entire parcel.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions or comments? I guess I just have one final question. Have you ever had an easement that, after it was granted, was rescinded in any way?
Never have had any rescinded. We've had new owners who bought an easement encumbered property come to, again, I'm speaking from my previous career with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, come to us and want to buy the easement out, or figure out a way if they can somehow nullify the easement. And obviously that isn't an option. It is a perpetual easement. There is no provision, short of some congressional action. I'm not aware of any U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service easement that's ever been extinguished. One of the, I guess, pros or cons, depending on your perception of federal easements, is that these easements are not even subject to eminent domain. So with some nonprofits, any nonprofit that has a conservation easement, those parcels, if there's a need for a new highway, new transmission line, a utility company can come in and exercise eminent domain on a conservation easement held by a land trust. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is obviously, the easement is held by the United States of America. They are not subject to eminent domain. So they are very, very difficult, once they are in place, to modify or change.
Thank you very much. Okay, if there are no further comments, we have heard from the staff that there is nothing proposed here that would violate or contradict any of our planning efforts. Is that correct?
As Chair, Planning Board members, that's correct.
Okay. And I think we have provided questions and all comments. And so I think, barring anything else, the business on the easement is concluded. Okay. Now, is there any other business that needs to come before the board this evening? Okay.
Ms. Chair, Planning Board members, I don't have any additional business.
Okay. Are there any public comments on anything subject to planning board jurisdiction at this time?
We have no public attending the meeting tonight.
Okay, I won't call for it again then. And then staff, our next scheduled meeting is October 17th. What will we look forward to doing that evening?
That meeting is a city meeting, and I am not positive what is on the agenda at this point, but April Sparks will be reaching out to you to get that information to you.
Then, unless anyone wants to make a comment, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan, for your expertise and joining us. The information you provided was very valuable and it aided my understanding greatly, and I appreciate it. And I
Thank
know all
you.
the other planning board members do as well.
Thank you very much for having me. And again, I apologize for my
Oh.
my tardiness and getting logged on, but I appreciate the planning board's consideration and comments. Great questions, and very much appreciate the
Okay,
opportunity.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
We're
you.
adjourned.
Thank you, Bo.